Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 2, The Social Mysticism of the Essenes, from The Mystical Christ by Manly P. Hall. Jacob Boehme's Symbol of Illumination. Chapter 2, The Social Mysticism of the Essenes. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire ruled the world. Its military arm conquered vast areas, and its political ambitions were advanced in defiance to those natural laws which pertain to human rights. Desolated communities in devastated regions bore silent witness to the tyranny of might. The horrors of war were followed by the sorrows of slavery and the inevitable disintegration of cultural institutions. The victims of Roman aggression were sickened by their losses, and the victors, if we may believe the more intelligent Romans, were sickened by their gains. The waters of the Mediterranean washed the shores of a sad, tired, and broken earth. It was inevitable that out of this great pain in the hearts of the poor and the bereaved there should be born a mystery of faith. The sorrow of the world gave birth to the man of sorrow. From the fall of the Judean monarchy, which may be dated from the destruction of Jerusalem, 586 BC, the Jewish people became increasingly more dependent upon their spiritual heritage. They matured philosophically and deepened the foundations of their cultural institutions. This unfoldment brought with it an appreciation of Greek learning. Alexander the Great made a friendly visit to Jerusalem, and whether or not the account given by Josephus is completely factual, it reveals the overall picture, the sympathetic meaning of hearts and minds. Though made possible by Alexandria's courteous presence, was substituted by the spirit of Aristotle, whose wisdom had enriched the character of the young Macedonian. It is of historical importance that the three great conquerors who influenced the destiny of the Jews in ancient and modern times, Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon, always treated these people with kindness and justice. Ambitious underlings were responsible for the tragedies which have disfigured the political and social history of Jewry. After Pompey captured Jerusalem in 65 BC, the Jewish people found themselves unwilling and unhappily involved in Roman politics. An example of their predicament was the occasion when Caligula proclaimed his own divinity and required public worship. The Jews were the only subjects of Rome who flatly refused to acknowledge the emperor's godhead. Caligula's assassination in AD 41 terminated the difficulty as far as Rome was concerned, but in distant Judea the incident had created bitterness between factions, accompanied by outbreaks of violence and the creating of lasting animosities. The cold detachment of historical perspective can in no way convey the personal sorrows and misfortunes that must be borne by those who live in troublous times. We cannot estimate pain only in terms of our own pain, and by the same means we can come to an appreciation of those forgotten heroes who resolved to keep faith with their God at all cost. The mystic always derives his strength from deep and hidden parts within himself. Thus, internally sustained, he continues in ways which his heart dictates. Because he moves by his heart and not by his mind, he is not inclined to an aggressive or belligerent statement or practice of his ideals. This gentleness and natural humanity have protected most mystical communities. The members of these groups have been respected for their sincerity and good works, even by those of other faiths. This was certainly true of the Essenes, who were permitted to live and worship in their own way during those periods otherwise difficult and dangerous. Most men, though themselves corrupt, honor the simple quality of goodness, and even the Roman was first a human being and then a citizen of Rome. There were many mystical sects in Syria and the Lebanon. They differed in some particulars, but their prevailing attitudes and customs were similar to those of the Essenes. In the barren hills near the Dead Sea, the Essenes had established their community at a place called Engaddi. The order was not numerically impressive, and at no time did the membership exceed 4,000. Their sphere of influence was due solely to the simple virtues which they practiced. The Essenes must be numbered among God's meat, who shall inherit the earth. They were a plain people gathered from many levels of society. A man was not born an Essene. He became one by the spiritual hunger in his heart. The heavy laden came among them and found rest. It is a mistake to assume that the Essenes were simply agriculturalists and craftsmen. Some had been scholars or wealthy merchants or successful tradesmen. Each in his own way had found it impossible to continue practices which offended his soul. He had therefore divided his goods, bestowed his properties, terminated his worldly career, and returned to the natural faith of his fathers. Simplicity is most attractive to those who have long struggled with the complications of human nature. The mystical communities were not opposed to the world, which they deemed a good and proper place. They were opposed to worldliness, a strange, insidious, corrupting influence which attacked hearts and minds and destroyed the natural dignity of the human state. The mystic, having experienced the fact of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, celebrated the former in his meditations and reveries, and practiced the latter through founding and maintaining a socialized community. All artificial divisions of race and class were ignored. It was accepted without question that all men were created free and entitled to equal opportunities. The Essenian settlement was a miniature democracy, a monist communal entity, an island of peace in the sea of chaos. It succeeded on a small scale because each of its members knew why he had chosen to be there and required very little leadership or guidance. There was no idleness among the Essenes, but there was protection for the young and repose for the aged. The group was not endowed, nor was it financed by the state. It was supported entirely by its own members, whose gain from lawful enterprise was kept in the common purse. The term lawful enterprise was interpreted as honest and honorable work. No activity was considered superior to another. Each of these who came bestowed his talents and abilities, but practiced them according to the convictions of conscience. There was a broad rule against merchandising. The Essenes could not buy the goods of one man and sell them to another. He must create or produce, and not barter or exchange. He was not supposed to hold political office, because by doing so, he would be forced on many occasions to violate the dictates of his own heart. He refused to take part in war, because he held life to be sacred. The Romans respected the Essenian code and exempted all members of the community who were in good standing from military service. As many who sought refuge in the settlement had no inclination to continue their previous occupations, they had no special skills suitable to their new way of living. These farmed the surrounding land and performed such labor as might be required for the common good. Some apprenticed themselves to craftsmen and learned new trades. The life of the Essene was divided between labor and learning. That the intellectual level of the community was high can be gathered from the historical accounts of the sect. Essenes were selected as teachers of the young, and Roman officers residing in Palestine selected these mystics, preferring them to scholars of other Jewish sects or tutors sent from Rome. Under the gentle guidance of these godly men, children received not only learning, but also enlightenment. The emphasis was upon the unfoldment of character and the cultivation of moral and ethical graces. The Essenes were occasionally called upon in matters of state, but always as impersonal counselors. They would speak only the truth and were incorruptible. Efforts to bribe them or intimidate them were entirely useless. Some of the Essenes practiced medicine and healed the sick without charge. They were especially mindful of the poor, who could not afford to engage physicians. When the Essenian doctor attended a patient, he would not only prescribe a remedy, but would also clean the house, do the mending and washing, and any other task which sickness had interrupted. If some gift was forced upon him by one of the grateful, it was placed in the general storehouse of the sect. Possibly influenced by older Syrian traditions, The Essenian community favored carpentry and building. It seemed to them that the building of a house was an appropriate symbol of building human character and a better world. To work with the hand was especially commendable, and the skilled craftsman, bringing comfort and security to homemakers, was contributing to the well-being of society. There is a report that the Essenes traced the origin of their community to the visit of Pythagoras, who had traveled through the Near East on his way to Asia. We have no proof that the sect was devoted to higher mathematics or the deeper abstracts of philosophy, but in some respects they show Grecian influence. Their religious principles were essentially devotional, and they required no more theological scholarship than was available to the humblest of their group. They could only meet in perfect spiritual equality by interpreting holiness as the unselfish service of God through helping His children. The Essenes held children in special regard. The order adopted orphans and reared them with all tenderness. They trained these young people and were attentive to natural abilities and inclinations. When these children reached maturity, they were in no way required to accept the teachings of the sect or to become members. They might choose to do so or not, as they pleased. The order required or expected no compensation for service of this kind, for the good deed fully rewards itself. The community could be selected as a collective guardian for the young or the old. Sometimes one of the more prominent Essenes was made the administrator or executor of an estate. Goods entrusted to him were protected by his life and honor, and if he asked to be removed from his trust, it was a public indication that the estate was being mismanaged by members of the family or others beyond control. The Essenes also permitted their community to be a place of temporary refuge or retreat. Anyone could come among them as long as they respected their ways. The stranger might ask for counsel, discuss his problems, and unburden his heart. All confessions were confidential. Simple and kindly advice was given, but no effort was made to convert the visitor to the doctrines of the sect. Incidentally, this was probably the most powerful method of converting. Those who left never forgot the gentle brotherhood and may return years later to this place of peace. Among the Essenes, there were some who received the gift of prophecy and could interpret dreams and visions. Such powers are often associated with advanced mystics. Josephus, the Jewish historian, mentioned a certain Essene named Simon, who interpreted correctly the strange dream of the ethnarch Archelaus. Although some mystical practices of this sect were regarded as heretical by the Orthodox Jews, the Essenes were accepted as a curious but kindly group, whose ways were beyond the comprehension of average persons. There was no crime among them. They kept no slaves, and they acknowledged no masters. The group was also remarkable for longevity. So simple was their way of life, and so modern their habits, that many of them attained to 100 years of age. It was general knowledge that the Essenes practiced mystical rites and kept sacraments peculiarly their own. They taught the corruptibility of the body and the immortality of the soul. It is believed that they accepted the doctrine of metempsychosis, but this is not known with certainty. The immortal part of man was held within the body, as though in prison. Through disciplining the flesh, releasing the mind and heart from all worldliness, and dedicating the life to good works, the soul could be liberated and could finally ascend to the subtle, airy region from which it had come. More specifically, the release of man's higher self was not a departure from the corporal part, but was a refining and purifying of the body, thus permitting the light within to flow forth into more perfect expression. In this way, the body became the servant of the spirit and not its master. The Essenes taught that good spirits, when they had become perfect in righteousness, came in the end to a happy, peaceful, and radiant habitation in a beautiful land beyond an ocean. This region was the one which they had expressed in their hearts, and for which they yearned with natural piety. Josephus points out that in those abstract parts of their doctrine, the Essenes held convictions similar to those of the initiated Greeks. Whatever their secret rites may have been, the public rituals of the Essenian sect were practiced through honest toil. They taught that the sweat of honorable labor was the true water of baptism. Like the Pythagoreans, the Essenes held communal prayer before sunrise. There were also private prayers and time set apart for secret worship. They said grace before their meals, and the words were those of gratitude and thankfulness. Because of their way of life, they asked nothing of the divine favor except the privilege of serving in its name. They refused no request for help, even though it was unreasonable, and were without pride. The members did not own even the simple robes which they wore. Each kept his own garment clean and mended, and when it was no longer serviceable, received another from the communal storehouse. Thus members were distinguished for their cleanliness and tidiness at a time when those were not prevailing virtues. There were two distinct groups within the Essenian order. The higher group was dedicated to absolute continence and rejected marriage and all human ties and relationships except spiritual fellowship. Men and women were equally eligible to both grades of the order. The lower group was composed of households who could marry and raise families and keep their simple homes in the community. Those living in wedlock were vowed to purity, and marriage among them were looked upon as a mystical sacrament. All members of the brotherhood refrained from adornment, wore no jewelry, and renounced vanity. Members of the lower grade, who were childless, took into their houses the children of relatives, and provided by adoption the homes for orphans. The aged were held in the highest esteem, and it was remembered that they had worked faithfully and lovingly as long as their strength had permitted. Those who were sick or injured were given constant and devoted care, and protected from all want to the end of their lives. The Essenes adopted the processes of life as proper and decreed by God, and in no way resented the infirmities of years. By virtue of this attitude, there was very little sickness among them. Furthermore, they believed that growth towards God was a joyous experience. There was no place in their faith for despondency. By perfect acceptance, they attained peace and serenity. The celibate group was perpetuated either from the lower grade or by new members who had been drawn to the order by the spiritual consolation which it offered. Through the circumstances of time, some of the members of the lower grades were left alone. These naturally drifted into their mystical preoccupations. In these ways, the sect perpetuated itself for several centuries. Mystical communities are closely associated with the social currents of their time. The Essenes met a peculiar need, and having filled this requirement, they faded away slowly from the memory of history. Even while they flourished, only three writers, Pliny, Josephus, and Philo, gave them particular notice. There is no record of the decline of the order. They came, they labored, and the rest is silent. Some believe that Essenism was absorbed in the larger stream of Christian mysticism. Like John the Baptizer, they preached in the wilderness, and when the Messiah came, their work was done. Almost nothing is known of the Essenian sect. After the end of the 1st century AD, they were a link between pagan and Christian mysticism, and were absorbed into the new faith or into the Orthodox Jewish communities as a result of the conflict between the Christians and the Orthodox Jews. Modern religious writers, in an effort to explain the beginnings of Christianity, have considered the possibility that Jesus was an Essene. There is considerable circumstantial evidence to sustain such an assumption. The humble manner of the man Jesus and the quiet patience with which he unfolded his ministry, together with the social implications scattered throughout his teachings, are essentially Essenian. On the other hand, there is no direct reference to the sect in the New Testament. This in itself is strange when we realize how closely the doctrines parallel. It is possible, of course, that old records were defaced or mutilated by those zealots who were resolved to protect the uniqueness of the Christian dispensation. It is a further wonder that non-Christian historians and philosophers of the period never raised the question. Social mysticism has contributed a tremendous impulse to the advancement of civilization. The great religious teachers of the past were inspired sociologists, and the codes which they gave to the world always emphasized the application of spiritual convictions to personal and collective conduct. The virtuous man must not only be true to his God, but must also keep faith with his fellow man. Civilization is, therefore, the record of religion in action. It was impossible to believe in wisdom, love, and justice of God without being moved to act in accordance with the divine will. Even under an autocratic system, the governor was inspired to benevolence and the people to integrity. The mystical vision extended horizons and intensified resolutions. It was the will of God that his creatures should dwell together in peace, security, and contentment. No explanation of this fact was necessary, for it could be experienced as a certainty of consciousness. Men are not easily moved by forces operating outside of themselves, but they cannot resist internal compulsions. Civilization is a motion from within man. He releases his social instinct in the same way that he draws a picture, writes a book, or composes a piece of music, by strengthening the idealistic and benevolent instincts of the heart. Mysticism first civilizes the person, and through the person transforms the physical environment. The Essenian community revealed the Essenian conviction, and in doing so exposed the natural mystical concept of a social order. Many times in subsequent history, mysticism again revealed itself, and always the content was the same. The more confused and corrupt man's political and economical institutions became, the more clearly the human heart restated its determination. Consciousness does not seem to evolve, rather it emerges. In those periods when its overflowing was the most abundant, we had eras of enlightenment. Conversely, when the spiritual current ebbed, there were long centuries of benightedness. Men do not dictate progress. They become instruments of a motion greater than themselves. We grow by the increase of light and not by the multiplication of laws. Our faith in modern democracy is strengthened by the sincere belief that it is a way of life coming from the heart. If we are correct in this assumption and remain true to our faith, we can and will protect the rights of man as a statement of worship. In this regard, we require of the mind that it shall build enduring foundations of wisdom and skill to support our dreams. In the Gospel according to St. John 13:34 and 35, Jesus makes a statement of profound social import. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another. As I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have loved one to another. The application of this commandment in the political, economic, and social spheres would result in collective peace, security, and contentment. To the mystic, enlightened love is the universal medicine. It is the only permanent remedy for those evils which have their origin in hate, selfishness, and pride. The human heart accepts as an experienced fact the reality of gentle teachings, of practical cooperation. Yet, so knowing and so believing, we permit our institutions to expand without adequate ethical overtones. This inconsistency is responsible for those individual and collective dilemmas in which we find ourselves. Society must be preserved because of man, and not in spite of man. Mind has enriched us by strengthening the faculty of individuality, but this enrichment in no way relieves us of ethical obligations. We now have the conscious privilege of voluntary cooperation. A gracious and loving action need not be justified or explained. Long before the technique of psychology was systematized, it was common knowledge that destructive thinking corrupted both the mind and the body. Must we reduce the fact to a formula before it is acceptable? Are we more inclined to guard our thoughts because we are convinced that the law of cause and effect operates on the plane of mind as surely as in the material sphere? Experience shows us that psychologists themselves continue to contribute their full share to the negative thinking of mankind, even though they are fully aware of the processes involved and the consequences to be expected. The results of ethical or religious indoctrination must be carefully examined if the real values are to be discovered. Those who live well within some framework of spiritual or philosophical doctrine are generally persons who would have lived equally well in almost any situation. They brought their own integrity with them and simply unfolded it through some accepted pattern. Thus we find many beautiful and devout souls in all faiths, even though the sect itself may not be setting a very good example. Even congregational worship lacks significance except to those who inwardly experience more than is conferred by rituals. Faith remains, as it has always been, an intimate association between the individual and his consciousness of God. Public worship without private connection is only a formality. Thus, in substance, man's relationship with the spiritual source of himself is always mystical. A religion means to him exactly what it brings out of himself by a process of interpretation. It is easier to respond to impulse than to injunction. We may not understand or appreciate what others recommend, but we do accept without question that which we instinctively know to be true. Inward spiritual guidance reveals itself in ways adjusted to our daily needs. It comes to us in terms which we can appreciate and inspires us to some immediate course of action. Where mysticism motivates conduct, it flows through ourselves into collective society. We live outwardly, but from within ourselves. It becomes our moral duty to bear witness through conduct to the majesty of conviction. To fall in this is to break faith with something we know to be beautiful and necessary. Yet, as we look about us, we may be disheartened by the lack of spiritual content in the civilization which we have fashioned. We wonder how a creature with so many advantages can so consistently corrupt his own institutions. Nature did not teach him to abuse and misuse his opportunities, nor does God require disobedience to his own laws in order that his creatures shall advance their own cultures. The most obvious explanation is a gradual process of man obscuring his own values and coming, in the end, to dwell in a world fashioned in the likeness of his own confusion. Social systems rise and fall without a conscious realization of the universal plan, by focusing attention completely upon the objective productions of the mind. We have disordered our sense of values. We look about us for inspiration when we should look within us for guidance. We are surrounded by a sphere of unorganized and disorganized intensities. If we pattern our own conduct from the conduct of others, we must share in their disasters. We cannot commit the same offense so often or so devoutly that it can become a virtue. Facts remain even though no one believes in them, and error is no less unfortunate because it has an impressive following. Mysticism teaches those who have shared in its vision that in solving collective problems, the way in is the way out. The mystic is not selfish when he seeks the restatement of his own essential values. It is the motive rather than the action which determines the degree of merit. It is not the right of each citizen to withhold his cooperation in situations which outrage his sense of integrity. It is also necessary that some in each generation preserve the eternal faith. It is only after we have solved certain problems in our own natures that we are able to make a significant contribution to society. Jesus told his disciples to seek first the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness. We have no way of finding the world of spirit except by retiring into those inner depths, which brings us close to the eternal power. Once we have experienced the consciousness of God, we can appreciate the destiny of civilization. Until then, we are part of a motion which is incomprehensible. Although each generation is burdened with peculiar abuses and some levels of human society are always corrupt, essential progress from the heart continues and is manifested in many ways. We have overcome, or more correctly, outgrown many of the abuses which burden the past. Slavery is almost completely abolished. The conditions of the young and the aged have been vastly improved. We are also increasingly aware of world needs and are generous in our efforts to relieve privation and suffering. The dignity of the human estate is perfected by unfolding legal codes, and the life expectancy has been lengthened through hygiene and sanitation. Opportunities for self-improvement are increasing abundant, and religious tolerance is more widely practiced than heretofore. All this and much more reveal a real and natural growth and the progressive enrichment of human consciousness. We have not failed, rather we have not yet completely succeeded. There is more to be done, and the work must be inspired by the simple impulse of brotherly love. Social mysticism may in some instances attempt more than ordinary experience can sustain. The idealist lives in the future, in a better world which is the product of nobler instincts. Because of this visionary tendency, the mystic is called impractical. Reactionaries insist that we cannot fashion a world according to the heart's desire, but must forever compromise with contemporary pressures. Light cannot temporize with darkness, and truth reduced to the level of error loses all of its strength. The laws of the wise are not designed to regulate the conduct of the foolish, but this does not mean that wisdom from the heart will not ultimately rule the world. There can be no experience of fraternity apart from a sincere aspiration of world peace. We desire that suffering shall end and that all men shall dwell together with kindness and charity. Even as we live, we see encouraging evidence that trial and error are strengthening man's resolution to perfect his institutions. In order to achieve, we must have a purpose to which we can dedicate our lives and our honor. The architect first designs his building and then assembles the elements and materials necessary to its completion. To the mystic, God is the great architect, the master over all those craftsmen, whose combined labors must enrich and beautify the creation. Each man is a master builder, serving the supreme architect. Just as it took centuries to complete the massive cathedrals of Europe, so it may require thousands of years or even longer to perfect the everlasting house. It is a privilege to each of us to trew a stone and to place it properly in some place of the edifice. If our stone is securely set, others can put theirs upon it, and so the building grows. But if each stone cutter trims the rock only according to his own taste, or the mood then upon them, there is no certainty that it can be used without further loss of time and effort. For this reason, the master of the workmen who gathered to build the temple of Solomon, the king, went each day at noon into the sanctum sanctorum, and there received the work of that day, traced by the living finger of the supreme architect. The social commonwealth must be unfolded according to a proper trestle board. The plan is complete only in the heart and mind of God. To know the work of the day, which for man is supreme knowledge, each must go to the sanctuary and receive his allotment of labor. To the mystic, this means a prayerful and humble receptivity. He kneels before the flaming altar of his own heart and asks for his portion of labor. The voice of the innermost speaks through the oracle of the heart, and a little part of the plan is thus revealed. The workman knows that he builds not in vain, and he asks no more of comfort or consolation than this certainty that he is keeping faith with the past and preparing the way for the future. In this manner, we have the great democracy of works under the absolute autocracy of the divine will. Those also serve who are hewers of wood and carriers of water. No part is more or less when all are necessary. When the great architect calls us to labor, we bring the skill or the strength that is ours. There is always a place which needs our offering. When, at the end of the day, the master of the work calls us to rest and refreshment, we are content, for we know that we have served. In this way, mysticism frees our hearts from the limitations of selfish and impermanent enterprises. We no longer think only of ourselves, nor do we see the works of our lives crumble about us, nor again must we leave our dreams to a future that will not understand. There can be no remorse for those who fulfill the instructions of the great architect. The foundation of the house is upon a solid rock of truth, and not upon the shifting sands of popular conceits. There can be no fear where faith is strong, no despair when hope is incorruptible. To build with life for life is to share in a certain victory. We build not for now, but for the ages, and the ages shall bear witness. Men are most grievously afflicted with uncertainties, when their hands and minds are idle and their hearts are without devotion. Much of the restlessness, confusion, and discord that we see about us exists because men have not found their great work. Daily labor to merely provide creature comforts is not enough to satisfy the wonderful consciousness within us. Our many faculties, powers, and abilities demand use and expression. The mystic is happier and more peaceful than those not so internally entangled because he has found his work. He knows what must be accomplished, and he is ready to contribute everything that he is and everything that he has to the task. Contentment is not, therefore, rest from labor, but a call to a larger effort. Some may interpret the mystic way of life as an invasion of common responsibilities. This is a false judgment, however, on insufficient evidence. Man can never be happy unless he is creating, and most of all, he yearns to create a better world, even if he does not believe that he shall live to see the completion of his hopes. Love strengthens him. He builds for love of those who shall come after him. He wants his children and their children to have a security which he has never known, except in his heart. The individual is ever ready to sacrifice himself to causes which are worthy of his sacrifice. He dies on the field of battle to protect his country and his home. He gives his life, slowly and painfully, of the economic battlefield to supply the needs of those he loves. Why then should we doubt that, enriched by deeper vision, these same fathers and mothers, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, who given of themselves so generously to protect their little worlds, would not also in fuller and larger measure find fulfillment in the service of an eternal plan? Experience has also shown that sincerity of purpose can be advanced by simple faith as surely as by substantial knowledge. If the heart tells us that we should perform a task, we are not inclined to debate the issue or to question the authority of the impulse. The idea that we should understand all in order to do anything is an intellectual approach to a mystery, the substance of which is behind the reach of the mental faculties. Complete understanding comes at the end and not at the beginning. We grow in order that we may understand. The mind can help us to avoid unreasonable attitudes and practices, but it cannot bestow a quality of spiritual participation which must be earned by simple and sincere devotion. It is everywhere evident in the unfoldment of the universal plan that man has not been equipped to proceed from certainties. Rather, he must advance towards them. Sustained first by a quality of dedication, because he advances towards knowing and not from knowing. He must grope his way out of the darkness of ignorance through the twilight of uncertain certainties to emerge finally into the light of truth. As this is the appointed way, the mystic accepts without complaint that which he cannot comprehend. Convinced by this obedience, he fulfills the wonderful purposes of God. Thus, instead of seeking to understand the mind of heaven, he asks only to so live and conduct his affairs that he will be worthy to receive into himself the impressions of the heavenly mind and to serve these impressions with faith and a good hope. The experience of living finally impels the individual to the recognition of universal principles. These are sensed or realized as remote in substance, but imminent in manifestation. The acceptance of the fact of universal consciousness, within which the planner, the planned, and the planned for exist together, bestows a sense of internal security. In light of this conviction, circumstances order themselves, everything becomes meaningful, unreasonable doubts and fears are dissolved, and we know ourselves to live and move and have our being within the benign sovereignty of the divine consciousness. Such a realization, if it is honorably obtained, must constructively influence conduct. We inevitably adjust our habits and practices to meet the dictates of our concepts. If this does not occur, then our beliefs are intellectual acceptances and not convictions of consciousness. It is the province of knowledge that it shall bestow skill. We learn in order that we may apply learning to our numerous activities. If study, then increases proficiency. It fulfills itself through action. In like manner, faith confers a kind of skill to the works of the heart. It strengthens resolution, intensifies values, and dedicates conduct. From such an enlargement of internal values, we may naturally expect a more enlightened and benevolent quality of personal conduct. The individual himself should be strengthened and comforted and should manifest these attainments as love, patience, and composure. In nature, all causes must produce their effects, and where the effect is absent, there must be a deficiency of cause. We cannot love God with a true devotion and remain unreconciled with his creatures and his creation. We cannot understand the mysterious fact of truth and at the same time doubt the works which it causes and sustains. To accept God is to accept life also, and to live in a continuous state of acceptance. It is understanding and not criticism which solves difficulties and dissolves uncertainties. The Essenes resolved to live by the laws of God in a world of men. We have no evidence that flowers know they grow or what their destiny will be. They fulfill themselves, each according to its own kind, by simply permitting consciousness to guide conscious and conscious to govern conduct. The Essenes unfolded the basic plan for human society. The more devoutly they practiced these principles, the more obvious it became that the program was both possible and practical. Practice led to the personal experience of truth. By loving their fellow men and serving them, the Essenes discovered in their own hearts the God of love and service. Other sects held the same beliefs, but many were content with a mental acceptance. As a consequence, their doctrines remained sterile, following along the way that faith impelled. The Essenes found themselves experiencing the natural fact of social democracy. With them, it was neither a political ideal nor an ethical formula. It was the inevitable communal relationship of honest human beings. Democracy happened to them because they were guided by the love in their own hearts. Aggressive types of reformers are inclined to criticize mysticism and its exponents. The man of action is more impressed by the quality of activity than the quality thereof. He considers the quiet acceptance of the divine plan to be negative and non-productive. Perhaps there are also two sides of this problem. Does the obscure mystic practice his principles in vain because he lives and labors and dies unknown, unhonored, and unsung? Is he defeated by circumstances because his contemporaries are unaware of his existence or decline to be affected by his endeavors? We are admonished by our scriptures to sow the seed of our good works, but not to be mindful of the harvest. The universe has spiritual dimensions which we do not fully understand, and that which appears to be the least among men may be the greatest in the presence of God. The mystic is certain in his own heart that those who labor in the cause of truth do not labor in vain. They are contributing to the collective human consciousness on a plane of subtle and invisible influences. If the light shining in the devout heart sends but a feeble ray into the world of forms, it may at the same time emit beams of extraordinary brilliance in the more subtle atmosphere of soul power. In this way, that which cannot reach humanity from the outside because of material density can nourish and strengthen our fellow creatures from within themselves. We are nourished not only by bread, but also by the energies of the soul. The mystic devoutly believes that the love in his heart enriches the lives of all created things. Love and faith and hope do not perish because the living, the faithful, and the hopeful are apparently defeated in their efforts to enlighten others. All good thoughts and good deeds flow into a qualitative reservoir where they are available to each aspiring mortal in his hour of need. Where we add to the substance of creative integrity, we are making a greater contribution to the spiritual security of the race than when we strive so valiantly to correct a particular defect in human society. The good man may be obscure in this world, but the quality of his convictions is not obscure in the universe of values. The wisdom and love of the ages are as surely accumulative as ignorance and hate seem to be. If we each inherit our part of an ancient disaster, we also share in the heritage of hope. We are spiritually stronger because we share in all the good that has gone before. The nobler parts of our civilization have come to us through the patient sacrifices of noble men and women whose names are not even remembered. Their efforts mingled together have become a mighty stream of soul power. Those who have served God in secret have been made manifest through the consciousness of their devotion. The power which marks each sparrow's fall is not indifferent to those who serve and wait and watch. We are not better because of the good that has gone before, and the future will still be better because of the good which we add to the present store. The realization that the practice of the divine presence is itself a great and wonderful service to others, comes as a natural result of mystical devotion. If we believe that collective prayer has power, can we deny that collective conduct on the plane of prayer is even more powerful? Is it not unselfish service in the Spirit of God, a constant prayer uttered into action? Words without works are dead. Which then is the true worshiper? One who preaches or one who practices? In times of national emergency, our churches unite their congregation, beseeching divine intersection. Is not the mystic justified in his belief that to the degree he keeps the faith will keep him? It is most unlikely that the Essenian community expected to be remembered in the descent of world idealism. The Essenes left no writings, inspired no particular reforms, and taught no formal doctrines. They quietly walked in the light and had fellowship one with the other. These devout people probably were a little saddened when their minds informed them that their tangible accomplishments were slight and transitory. They had achieved little, but they had attained much. Far away in China, the wonderful old teacher Confucius died of a broken heart because the world had rejected a teaching which he knew was desperately needed. Later, China deified the kindly man whose last words were, "I have failed." It is not wise, therefore, to estimate with the shortness of human vision the consequences of right effort. The servants of truth are under the protection of heaven and are content to accept its perfect works. Life is either a state of rebellion or a state of acceptance. It seems that both courses are necessary, but experience shows that all rebellion must end in acceptance. We have no authority of ourselves, for it is the Father in us who doeth the works. We are fulfilled to the degree that we fulfill the Father. The mystic, from his own internal experience, knows that he is useful no matter how small may be his sphere of influence. If he is faithful in little things, he will earn the right to a larger opportunity. This comes not because he seeks it, but as an inevitable consequence. He accepts the larger task with the same humility and the same dedication. He is moved into his proper place, not by his own will or his own ambition, but by the power of God. Where faith is real, there can be no impatience, for in the heart there is no essential difference between the large and small. The rise of Christian mysticism was only the perpetuation of the heart doctrine. It was expressed through new symbols and associated with new names, but its substance was unchanged. It is not important to establish the historical descent from one sect to another. Rather, we should be interested in the perpetuation of a substantial spiritual fact. To the mystic, all things are mystical. As the Christian faith expanded, the life of Jesus of Nazareth was accepted mystically as an experience of consciousness, a mystery in the spirit. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.